Greetings, how are you? This is Coach Fleischer, and as you can see by the yellow screen, we have moved on from Module 2, which was orange, to now we're in Module 3, which is yellow. Specifically today, we're in Module 3, Session 1. We'll be here in this module for about 2 weeks, and then we'll have a check for learning at the end of it. For today, specifically, we're going to be going over aerobic versus anaerobic. And aerobic versus anaerobic, it's very simply stated and kind of easy to evaluate when you look at it. Aerobic-based activities are in general longer, slower in duration, kind of a constant state of exercise. Anaerobic, with the prefix of being an, meaning without oxygen, it's shorter duration, more interval style, and more explosive. Aerobic uses fat as its predominant energy source through a thing called beta oxidation in the Krebs cycle, which you'll learn a ton about. And then anaerobic, it uses carbohydrates or glycogen as its predominant energy source. When you look at the two, anaerobic, most people kind of wrap themselves around, well, anaerobic, it's got to be mostly strength training, and aerobic is mostly like cardiovascular, like going for a run or being on an elliptical, a Stairmaster, or a bike. Here's the deal. The real big difference, the specific difference between aerobic and anaerobic is where the body switches from this phase in exercise to this phase. And it's kind of, the threshold for that is called anaerobic threshold. Anaerobic threshold is pretty easy to figure out the name, but it's roughly about 80% of age-adjusted heart rate, right? So if you have somebody who is working at a certain level and they're able to hold a conversation and they can work out and hold a conversation, you know, oxygen allocation would tell you that, well, shoot, they're probably aerobic because they're able to work at this level and hold a conversation. When you get over here, a real quick and dirty way for me to know if somebody is getting anaerobic or progressing towards anaerobic and they've crossed the anaerobic threshold is if they can hold a conversation or if they can do the exercise. If they can do both at the same time, chances are they're over here and they're still working aerobically. If they have to make a decision between telling me about their day at work or having oxygen for their workout, then I know they're anaerobic. And as a practitioner, I tend to take my clients kind of right along that anaerobic threshold. And it doesn't have to be like you're completely tied to strength training or cardiovascular for anaerobic and aerobic. Just think this through, right? You can hop on a Stairmaster, a step mill, a bike, an elliptical, and you can work at higher intensities that take you over 80%, and then you have to recover. So you can do that on a bike. You can do that on an elliptical, you can do it on a Stairmaster, and you can make that piece of cardiovascular, fingers and quotes, equipment more anaerobic in nature. To even like juxtaposition this a little bit further, doing short sprints of 10 yards versus running for 20 minutes outside. Shorter duration, more explosive, that's anaerobic. The other side of that would be running for 20 minutes, aerobic. And so I don't want you to think in terms of the tool defines if it's aerobic or anaerobic, because it need not be aerobic if you're doing cardio equipment. You could be working anaerobically. Additionally, you could, in essence, be working with strength training equipment and be in a slightly aerobic state because you have yet to work yourself into an anaerobic state. So realize it's not uniform in terms of I'm doing cardiovascular training, so as a result, it's all aerobic, or I'm doing weights, so it's all anaerobic. You can kind of fudge that a little bit. But in general, to the layperson, most people will associate strength training with anaerobic and cardiovascular with aerobic. Now, when you talk like specificity in training and you're coaching, say, athletes, if you look at this matrix down here and this, how it lays out, you have anaerobic to the left, you have aerobic to the right, you have 100-meter sprinters, and Olympic weightlifters to the left, and their predominant energy sources, carbohydrates or glycogen specifically. To the right, aerobic, you'd have 10,000-meter runners, distance runners in general, and they're utilizing fat as an energy source. Now, I will tell you, those guys that run at high levels and they run at elite levels, you know, they are running along anaerobic threshold. They are at that cusp between it being aerobic and anaerobic. And I would say that they've trained themselves to live in a certain amount of angst and discomfort to be able to push even a little bit into anaerobic during bouts of their race and be able to recover strategically during a race. But that's a different class, a conversation for a different class. So on the left-hand side, it makes sense, right? If I'm going to be training an Olympic weightlifter or somebody who's a 100-meter sprinter, think about the training protocols and what their body types, their somatotypes are like. Olympic weightlifters, big burly people who can throw a bunch of weights around, you don't want to train them over here at 18 reps to 20 reps. Conversely, your distance runners, you're not doing heavy sets of 1 to 2. No, if you're somebody who is training for Olympic weightlifting, 6 reps might be higher reps. And you might even have to cluster a set of 6 into 3 subgroups of 2 to be able to do it effectively. And sprint-wise, I mentioned earlier about sprinting short distances versus long distances. You might have sprint 10 seconds, maybe 100 meters or 80 meters or so, and then you recover. Then you sprint another 10 seconds, then you recover. So it's sprint, walk, sprint, walk, sprint, walk. And with anaerobic training, you do have a work-rest ratio, which I'll allude to now, but we will get into later on. And that work-rest ratio does make a difference in terms of the amount of work a person can do and the amount of recovery time that's allocated to that person to recover, because you have this accumulation of lactic acid in the bloodstream and you have this accumulation of CO2 that they have to blow off. And you're trying to train your athletes to be able to tolerate that discomfort for one, but also to be able to train their bodies to recover quicker so they can get into the next bout of activity or next play or next sprint on the basketball court or next serve in tennis that much quicker. So there's a training component here, and this goes right back to general adaptation syndrome. You're trying to place a particular stress on the human organism to elicit a training response. If I am going to be training 100-meter sprinters, I'm not going to have them run for 20 minutes. That is not the training stimuli I want to place on the human organism to get a training response to sprint faster. Same thing with Olympic weightlifters. So be cognizant of that when you look at like program design. Understand that you're applying a stimulus across this continuum to get the training response you want. Okay, this is going to jump us into other stuff when we get into module 4, but this is a good precursor to it, and I do refer back to this layout, this matrix, at a later date. So I hope that works. Hope you guys all understand it. Hope you got it. As long as you just understand aerobic, anaerobic, the threshold's about 80% of age-adjusted heart rate, and you want specificity in training, I got to tell you, I think you'll do great. Hope you guys are all doing your workouts and you're enjoying those workouts. Remember to stay on top of those on Team Builder, and that way I can get the feedback and I can give you points. Have a great one, guys. Thanks.